Welcome back to Property Deconstructed with Mark Erichello from Master Advocates, and I'm Pat Panetta from Tell Your Story Media, and we're welcoming back our guest from the last episode. Just to continue on, Mark, tell our listeners who we're talking to.
Yes, thanks, Pat. Thanks for having us on again. Evan Mulholland, MP, and Shadow Minister for Home Ownership and Housing Affordability, Shadow Minister for Outer Suburban Growth, and also I mentioned at the end of the last episode a distant cousin right. From our Italian side. So, thanks again for staying on for another episode, Evan. A lot more to unpack.
The outer suburban growth area, I reckon, is something we need to
Yes.
so what's Evan focusing on as far as that?
Yeah,
part of his
definitely.
portfolio?
Yeah, we'd like Evan to expand on that, and also the news that in Parliament this week that the vacant property land tax that was put on hold or stalled as well. So if you can expand on those things, Evan, and share some news.
Yeah, no worries. I'll start on the vacant property tax because it's fresh in my mind from last week in Parliament. But the government put forward a number of changes after the housing statement that weren't actually in the housing statement, but they've kind of sprung on the sector, that it would be expanding its vacant property tax from inner and middle suburbs to across the entire state, which would have a dramatic impact on investment, but also a new land tax on undeveloped land. Now, the government states it's not a revenue exercise. It's trying to, nudge the market into developing and building more and getting more houses on the market. But there are a huge amount of unintended consequences on that tax, particularly the tax on undeveloped land. You guys in the sort of investment and industry would know that if you've got a development, say, in a growth area, and you've got a big development that can't be all built at once. It's sort of split into 5 parts, takes several years. It's uneconomical to build all of that at once. So you might need to split it into 5 parts to get it all done in a timely manner that's sequenced and makes sense on your own revenue side. And so you'll have a situation because of this tax where you'll get the first 3 parts done, but then pay additional land tax on the second 2 parts. And so I think that's really unfair when people are doing the right thing and might be captured in this tax because it was put out there with zero consultation. It's untargeted and doesn't even do what the government intends it to do. And the vacant property tax is yet another tax on investment, but also, we see the government is talking about looking at different ways to attempt to tax that, like checking your water bills and doing other creepy things like that, which I think sends the wrong message. On the growth area side, so I was appointed the Shadow Minister for Outer Suburban Growth, and I think that was a message that the opposition is sending that it's serious about our growth areas and servicing the needs of our growth areas. Our growth areas are crying out for investment. Our growth areas are crying out for infrastructure. And The thing I hear constantly in growth areas in my part of the world in the outer north is that people want their infrastructure to be delivered before or as they move in, not decades afterwards. No more perfect example of that than the suburb of Calcallo, which I've been fighting for. You've got a housing estate with about 7,000 homes that has been put onto Donnybrook Road, which is single lane each way. It's an old farm track, and there's only one road in of that estate and one road out, which means it's basically been the worst game of The Sims ever played. If you're trying to get out in the morning at peak hour, it'll take you over an hour to get out of your own housing estate. But we see the same thing over and over again, whether you're in Point Cook, whether you're in Werribee, Wyndham or Clyde. We're seeing all these housing estates being put in, which is great. We're accommodating growth, but no infrastructure dollars to match that. And one part of that reason is the growth area infrastructure contribution, which all developers may make and therefore consumers pay for when they buy property out there. That hasn't been spent in about 2.5 years and has about $500 million sitting in government coffers on Spring Street, not being spent in their communities. This fund goes to things like servicing new bus routes, bus stations, train stations, bridges, footbridges, connections, bike paths, all the things that make an estate a community. And we see this government failing to deliver basic services to these communities. Also, just having the basic knowledge that if you're going to put tens of thousands of people in one specific area, maybe we need to duplicate this road, like Donnybrook Road, to service that growth. Otherwise, we're going to have massive traffic congestion, which we see in the outer north. I see it in areas like Greenvale and Mickleham and Craigieburn, where they're putting tens of thousands of housing estates in, but still leaving the lion's share of Mickleham Road unduplicated. So they're repeating the same mistakes they've made in Calcallo. And also on the growth area front, we're seeing established suburbs serviced by V-Line trains. V-Line is a regional train. It was never meant to service established suburbs, but we haven't seen the government invest in electrified rail services. In fact, the Western Rail Plan, which was going to deliver electrified rail services on the metro service to Wyndham Vale and Melton, has been cancelled because of government costs. It got cancelled along with the airport rail.
Yeah.
The Labor Party have promised that over 2 separate elections. And so we're seeing, massive investment in the inner city. They're spending $1 billion to remove level crossings in Brunswick. Now, that's great for the people of Brunswick, who already have hospital services, ample public transport services, access to schools, etc. But when you're putting hundreds of thousands of people in our growth areas, I reckon it's more important to make sure they've got public transport access, basic access to amenities, than it is, having all this stuff in the inner city.
Yeah, you need your key amenities, and that will even prevent people from feeling even the attraction to take a step out and invest to rent or invest to buy a home to live in, or invest in full stop in the suburbs that don't have that basic civil infrastructure.
So why is that money sitting there? You talk about that fund that the government has for that very purpose. Why is it just sitting there not being used?
Because they haven't spent it. It's basically propping up the budget to make that budget look a little bit better each May. I think there's much better ways of doing that. I mean, in the housing statement, again, they haven't spent it in 2.5 years. There's about $500 million sitting there. And they had the gall to say in the housing statement, they're bringing forward a package of works. When I called the former Premier out on it, he said, well, we don't rush into these things. We think about it carefully, and we think about how to spend these things and work with communities. The government has only just sent letters to local councils basically saying, what do you want? So they clearly weren't going through that process and sat on their hands. I would actually much rather see a process which the Liberals and Nationals did when we were last in government, which is when a developer is building all of the new estates, already have the tools out, the government works with local communities and local councils and says to the developer, you can write off this tax contribution that you have to make if you're able to build this bridge for us, build this train station for us, build this bus stop for us, or build this new community centre. Because that way you're getting much better value for taxpayers' money. You're not sitting on it in Spring Street waiting to see what needs to be spent. You're actually getting it out the door through tax offsets
and incentives,
rather than having it sit there, having to go through a communications team of 20, having to go through all this bureaucratic process. And therefore, when people move in, when these migrant families and young people move into these housing estates, they've already got the basic community infrastructure they expect.
Yeah, you'd think in those outer suburbs it would be sort of in their best interest to look after the voters in those areas. Why are they focusing on the inner city and forgetting about the people in the outer sort of,
That's
the
right.
outer rim of Melbourne?
Well, we saw many of these growth areas have massive swings against the Labor Party at the election. The seat of Greenvale in the outer north had a 15.5% swing against the Labor Party. It turned it into a marginal seat. And we saw the same in the western suburbs. People are fed up. They're sick of waiting in traffic. They're sick of not having access to basic amenity, basic public transport. A lot of these estates, whether it be in Clyde, whether it be in Calcallo, Donnybrook, Wyndham Vale, the bus routes are set to 10 years ago. So you've got a bus route going to the front of the estate, which means if you're at the back of the estate where all the growth has happened, you have to walk a kilometre or two to get to your nearest bus stop.
Yeah.
We have to match the amount of growth that we're having with the amount of services that we're having as well.
Yeah, and access to all the amenities also gives you access to fair employment, so then you can pay taxes and contribute to the growth of the state as well. Because a lot of the new residents coming in on working visas, they might rent for 1 or 2 years, and then they're quickly looking for their first home.
Yes.
That's why they've come here, to establish a new dream as well. So
Right.
it's going to be, I think, getting a bit worse before it gets better with this. The current rental vacancy rates at 0.8%. In my 20+ year real estate career, I've never really seen it drop much below 1.8.
It's disastrous.
So that's it's getting pretty dire.
Is that dream still there? You say, migrants come and then after, a couple of years might think about buying a home, or a young person wanting to purchase a property. Is that still available and accessible for people who come here, and also for young people? I guess if we get it right, Evan, we can, make sure it is.
Yeah, I think it's still there. People do want home ownership, but a lot of people are giving up.
Yeah.
A lot of people are giving up on the home ownership because it's just all too hard. If you look at the 70s and 80s, it used to take on average 3 years' income to be able to buy your first home. That's hovering at about 14 or 15 years income.
15 years.
To be able
You've got to save for 15 years, right? Okay.
Buy your first home, or lend to buy your first home. And that is out of reach for a lot of people, and will take a lot of hard work. So we need to incentivize and prioritize first homeowners to be able to get in the market. And new taxes on property is going to do anything but that. And so while the government's very flashy housing statement talks about creating more supply, the opportunity to get into that, given the massive growth we've got, is made even harder by new taxes.
Yeah, and then what type of property you purchase or loan and mortgage you'll take on might adapt or change. No longer the large 3-4 bedroom house on a 600 square metre block. I think that horse is bolted for a lot of owners. Yeah,
and I think it's about choice. So the choice in the style of housing.
Yes.
Like the government's priority seems to be, build a lot of apartments with social and affordable housing as well. Small apartments are not for everyone. And most people, when they see themselves buying a home, want that 3 or 4 bedroom house that they can start a family in. And it's really our housing market, and I mentioned this in my maiden speech, it's having a real impact on family formation. We have the lowest birth rate in Victoria in the country at 1.48 children per woman. That's because people are putting off buying their first home, and they're only really thinking about having children and settling down once they are in that market and are financially secure enough to be able to do that. So when we think about housing, I'm all about choice. Having new apartments everywhere, that'll be good for renters and people that are transient with their style of housing, young people, singles and alike. But we also need to think about the style of housing, townhomes, different types of units, to accommodate that family formation piece for people that do want, a house, a bit of a backyard, a deck, to be able to start their own family and settle down roots in a community.
Oh, well said.
Yeah. Look, and it's a big task and a lot to think about there. It feels like I don't want to turn into a complete kicking exercise with the Victorian government, but it feels like it just hasn't been planned and ill thought through. So my question is, why is that happening? And also, why do governments sort of go for property owners? Why do they tax the property, the aspirational, and put their hands in their pockets? Is there another way to access revenue and money?
It's all about prioritisation. And when there's been so much waste, there's a massive amount of debt. We've got more debt than Queensland, New South Wales and Tasmania combined. And so, of course, when the government runs out of money, it's going to try to find that revenue from wherever possible. And unfortunately, property investors are an easy target.
Fast target.
Right.
Because in their view, no one has sympathy for landlords. So the case needs to be made that when you tax property investors, that has a massive impact. Again, these are people on modest incomes, about $100,000 a year, mum and dad investors who have made that choice to invest for their retirement. And that's a choice that people make that provides that opportunity for renters to be able to put a roof over their head.
Yes.
All these taxes do have flow-on effect, and we're seeing the impacts of that. The 1 in 4 investors that are selling, getting out of the market, even more have got appraisals done and are looking at the possibility of doing that. If more taxes have come through after this interest rate decision, they might finally pull the pin. But government taxes are factored into that decision. And so when you tax property, that has a dramatic impact on the rest of the sector as well. So if the government is serious about creating more supply, putting pressure down on rental prices and housing prices, it's also got to look at the taxation side as well, and the impact of the highest property taxes in the country are having on the rest of the sector.
That's really some great points you've shared, Evan, and I think many listeners may like to follow you as well. So you're other than the titles that we mentioned that you hold at present, you're also the deputy leader of the opposition in the Legislative Council, and they can follow you on is it the Liberal Party social channels that you'll be able to see your maiden speech and other speeches?
evanmulholland.com.au or Evan Mulholland MP on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Well, your job in opposition is to keep them honest on the other side, or at least keep an eye on them, and you're doing that. Property in Victoria and Melbourne needs a debate, a robust debate, and needs to be addressed real fast. I mean, don't you think, Mark, in your world, there's a lot of people who are very nervous, and
Definitely.
It just needs to get, so can you guys just sort it out, please, Evan, because we're getting nervous out here.
You've got to keep the ecosystem in balance.
Well, that's right. Yeah. Are you positive? Can we end on a positive note? Can we get through this? We're taxing, property, and people are being pushed out of the market, and we worry about the rental crisis and the housing crisis. Victoria's a great place to live, and we want to invest, certainly. And we want to be here. Yeah,
I love Victoria, and I love the northern suburbs. I've grown up in the northern suburbs, and now I represent the northern suburbs. Victoria is a place of opportunity, and has always been a place of opportunity that you can get ahead and make a life for yourself. And so I'm all about enhancing opportunity to the next generation, to new migrant families, to anyone possible, and democratising that process so people can achieve whatever they want to achieve in Victoria. And we'll be doing everything possible to make sure people can enjoy all the same things that I've achieved in life. And going forward to the 2026 election, we'll be putting forward a positive plan that will attract investment in the industry, but also attract investment for a whole bunch of for the rest of the economy as well.
I think we're talking to the future leader of the Liberal Party. If we in a few years from now, will it?
Not from the upper house, no.
Not from the upper house.
I'm very happy in the upper house.
Oh well, eventually they can sort that out, can't they? Anyway, that's a compliment, because I just feel like you're onto something there, and we need both the government and the opposition to be in good nick, so we have an alternative when it comes to an election.
Good
Wonderful.
Representation. Thank you so much, Evan.
Evan, a pleasure to having you on the program. Thank you, mate.
Really appreciate it.